faithfully delivering value by interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, we're interpreting a book for you called The Painter's Life, the life and work of traditional Chinese painters. Before we officially start explaining, let's listen to two stories. Legend has it that in the early Qing dynasty, there was a literati painter named Zhou Xun who was great at painting dragons emerging from clouds and also pretty skilled in martial arts. He hung his paintings on the Yellow Crane Tower in Wuhan, declaring he wouldn't sell them for less than 100 taels of silver. Back then, that was a huge amount of money, equivalent to the annual salary of a second-rank official. Such showy behavior drew some haters who came to take down the paintings and challenge him. But sadly, none could beat this highly skilled martial artist painter. But when someone actually offered to pay that money for a painting, Zhou Shun just gave it to the buyer for free. He said, "I'm not doing this for wealth. I'm just searching for a soulmate who truly gets my art." Similarly, in the early Qing dynasty, there was a landscape literati painter named Lu Wei who lived beside a temple in Songjiang. Folks wanting to buy his paintings would first climb the temple's high tower to watch for smoke from Lu's kitchen chimney. If the kitchen smoke rose on time at mealtime, it meant Lu Wei's family could still afford meals. At this time, if you went to buy a painting, you'd definitely be turned away. On the flip side, if the smoke didn't rise on time, it meant the painter's household had run out of food. Only then could you possibly buy his painting. These two slightly chivalrous tales actually match our impression of ancient Chinese literati painters. Too refined for the masses, they wandered day and night in scholarship, detached from worldly affairs. Painting was just a hobby for them, a way to pour out their inner feelings with brush and ink. They weren't full-time painters, didn't rely on art for income, and their lives had zero commercial vibe. The literati painters mentioned here were a special kind of artist in ancient times. They were scholar officials who, on top of holding office and studying, painted as a sideline. Famous examples include Long Wei of the Tang Dynasty, Su Shi of the Northern Song, and Tang Bo Hu of the Ming. Their works are what we now call literati painting. Generally, literati painters used a freehand style to depict landscapes, flowers, and birds. They were super particular about the calligraphy and poems on their paintings, even tying art to noble character. So these highly educated literati painters and those craftsmen who made a living from painting, focusing on skill, were totally different creators. In people's ideal, literati painters didn't paint for profit. Walking money to buy their art was downright insulting. But did ancient literati painters really have no worries about supporting their families? So, how did they actually make a living in society? If painters were supposedly so detached from the world, how on earth could people back then commission a painting? The book we're introducing today will clear up all these doubts. The author is James Cahill, an American art historian who taught Chinese art history at UC Berkeley for years. He served as a foreign expert at the Palace Museum and was hailed as the American who knew 17th century Chinese painting best, a true Western authority. This book wraps up Cahill's series on Chinese painting, taking a groundbreaking look at the economic lives of literati painters after the Yuan dynasty. You see, in traditional Chinese art studies, commercial aspects were always kind of taboo. But this book shows tons of cases where these so-called amateur painters had commercial motives. They weren't carefree hermits, but tied to business through their art. All right, now that we've covered the book, I'll break it down into three parts. First, how do people buy paintings in the Ming and Qing eras? Second, how do they pay for a painting? Third, What did painters think about ghost painting and fakes? Now, let's dive into the first point. In Ming and Qing times, how did folks buy paintings? Paintings weren't just decor, they played a bigger role in daily life. Take late Ming Suzhou. Booming commerce brought wealth, and people craved the refined life of scholar officials, fueling an art boom. A Ming era book, Treatise on Superfluous Things, was a lifestyle guide saying paintings needed proper placement, not just hanging. For festivals big and small, depending on status, you'd swap out paintings every few days. For example, on New Year's Day, hang images of the god of fortune and wise ancients. For Lantern Festival, switch to scenes of lanterns and plays. Based on the month and season, rotate through landscapes, pavilions, gods, flowers like plum and orchid, and fruit trees. Besides, paintings by famous masters were essential gifts for the middle class back then. People were keen on gifting paintings with different themes at various social occasions. For birthday celebrations, you'd gift auspicious paintings featuring longevity symbols like pine trees, white cranes, and turtles. Um, if celebrating an official's retirement from office, you'd gift landscape paintings depicting idyllic rural retreats. Yes, in ancient people's lives, paintings weren't just decorations, but essential social tools for the upper class. Having covered the importance of paintings in ancient life, let's now discuss specifically how to buy them. The proper first step was to exchange polite greetings via letter before making requests, not recklessly knocking on doors with cash. During the Qianlong era, a landscape painter named Wang Sanxi accepted cash orders and letters, but when someone actually showed up with money asking for a painting, he said, "You coming so rashly with cash to buy a painting, then how am I any different from a street vendor?" The art seeker left in anger. From this, we can see ancient painters didn't view themselves as selling commodities or being craftsman merchant. Transactions were always handled more subtly. A common practice was for buyers to first send a servant with a letter and later have that servant collect the painting, make payment, or deliver gifts. So if we were in ancient times seeking a master's work, we must first clearly state the theme in a letter, then agree on completion time and payment method. From surviving request letters, we see buyers were always extremely polite and respectful, regardless of status differences. For example, books existed teaching how to write such letters. One sample translated says, "Sir, your masterful works are divine. I hope you'll freely wield your spirited brush to create a few pieces for me. This way, hanging it in my central hall, I can enjoy all mountain beauties without stepping outside." Once the painter accepts your flattery, you can then suddenly suggest specific requirements. Besides commissioning directly, we could also hire an agent to purchase paintings. They acted as introducers and guarantors, relaying offers and demands between buyers and sellers. Sometimes they'd even offer professional advice to both parties. Of course, agents usually took a commission, like in late Ming, about 10% of the painting's price. So to boost income, some painters became agents for other artists. Ancient China had no shortage of savvy art agents. In late Qing, there was a famous literati named Yao Xi, highly learned and skilled at painting flowers and birds. He once took in Ren Shang, who was selling paintings on the streets, warmly hosting him while exchanging artistic insights. At a banquet, Yao Xi invited guests to play drinking games with cards designed by Ren. When people praise the exquisite designs, Yao seized the moment to introduce the painter. Naturally, guests commissioned works on the spot. Thus, Ren Shang rose to fame, eventually becoming a leading figure of the Shanghai school art. While staying with Yao, Ren painted 120 illustrations of Yao's poems as gratitude, now preserved in Beijing's Palace Museum. Beyond letters and agents, we could buy directly from markets. But this wasn't reliable at all. Influenced by China's tradition of valuing farming over commerce, literati saw public art sales as disgraceful. It reduced painters from cultured elites to mere craftsmen surviving on skill. Unlike modern respect for craftsmanship, craftsmanlike was a severe insult in Chinese painting, implying lack of cultural depth. So, painters only set up stalls when utterly desperate. But if all else failed, we could try direct visits. If not flatly rejected, you might get lucky. Take Tang Bohu. He admitted selling art and kept stacks of small, less demanding paintings at home for visitors to choose from. All right, assuming success, we've now found our desired painting and artist. How should the transaction proceed? That brings us to our second point, payment methods. As mentioned earlier, people often stereotype painters then and now as lofty intellectuals detached from commerce. But reality was quite the opposite. Most ancient painters didn't reject commerce entirely. Only a tiny minority lived free from financial worries. The majority had families to support. So people back then could absolutely buy paintings with cash, just in more tactful ways. For example, in early Song dynasty, an official sent 500 silver taels as birthday tribute to flower and bird painter Zhao Cheng. And mind you, this painter was as renowned as Emperor Huizong himself. Soon after, the official naturally received several of Zhao's paintings as return gifts. Such cash transactions wrapped in etiquette were common in ancient art dealings. And with the boom in Jiangnan's art market during Ming to Qing, more direct commercial methods emerged. Some painters began listing fixed prices, diving deeper into the art market. Qianlong-era painter Zhang Shi is a prime example. Speaking of Zhang Shi, we might know him better as Zhang Bancao. Though he served as a local official for years, he was deadly serious about his art. Not only did he master bamboo painting, but he was also hailed as a triple threat genius in poetry, calligraphy, and painting. Before becoming an official, Zhang lived in Yangzhou selling paintings. Back then, he'd post a price list at his door, clearly telling clients, gifts in kind can't match cold, hard silver. After all, big brother, what you give might not be what I want. But one thing's certain, cash always fills me with joy and inspiration, naturally leading to better work. This price list was elegantly called runge, literally, moistening fee. It was the standard pricing system for professional painters post-Ming, and Zhang's public posting caused a sensation in Yangzhou. Why? Because while most pros had private fee schedules, only Zhang boldly posted his on his gate, directly responding to market demand while openly selling to all. Notably, this direct link between commerce and creation spurred artistic professionalism, but also had downsides. As art production got scheduled like orders, efficiency demands led to ghost painting and fakes flooding the market, problems clearly reflected in Zheng's annual income records. He once wrote on a painting that he earned 1,000 taels of silver yearly from art sales, 4 times a second-rank official's salary then. Yet his price list charged just 4 taels for a medium hanging scroll. To hit 1,000 taels, he'd need to sell 250 pieces a year. That meant producing and selling 2 paintings every 3 days, clearly unrealistic for one person alone. So we might suspect ghost painting or fakes were involved. We'll revisit this later, but beyond cash, many painters preferred bartering with gifts. On one hand, this method felt less commercial, less smelling of copper, as they said. Plus, regardless of gift painting value equivalence, these trades carried ambiguous social debts. This let painters and patrons build equal relationships. With social debt in play, patrons wouldn't boss around like clients, nor would painters grovel like contractors. For instance, people could trade food for paintings. Late King painter Wu Daichu had a deal with a local eatery, 1 small painting per lunch. One day he complained to the chef, "The food's gotten awful lately." To which the chef retorted, "Master Wu, it's because your paintings have worsened. Similarly, liquor could be traded, a tradition dating to Tang dynasties. Painting sage Wu Daozi, lured by a temple abbot with 100 liters of wine, for a mural, for bold Ming painters like Wu Wei and Chen Hongshu, hiring courtesans to accompany them guaranteed paintings. Even personal cravings could be traded. Take Qing calligrapher painter Gao Finghan, another of Yangzhou's 8 eccentrics alongside Zheng Shi, who once demanded chrysanthemums and osmanthus as payment. We've covered many payment methods just now. That overall, money and social ties were the twin engines of ancient art deals. Higher status painters valued money less in trades, while social debts, being inflation proof, were prized more. Finished talking about payment methods for buying paintings in ancient times. Next, let's dive into the third key topic. How did painters view ghost painting and forgery issues? Earlier, when discussing Zheng Shi selling paintings, we mentioned two problems: ghost painting and forgeries. Actually, in the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties' art markets, this was quite common, with ghost painting closely tied to painters' working styles. Traditional Chinese painters' studios were mostly run by family and servants. Famous painters could hire assistants or take apprentices, with families passing down signature styles through generations. For example, Wen Zhengming's family from the Ming Dynasty was a renowned art clan in Suzhou. He excelled in poetry, calligraphy, and painting, grouped with Shenzhou, Tang Bohu, and Qiu Ying as the four masters of Ming, and even his nephews and disciples were highly skilled. Another of the four masters, Qiu Ying, who specialized in figure painting, had a daughter and son-in-law who were also master painters. In this setup, while a painting was mainly handled by the master, other family members often collaborated on parts of the creation. This led to ghost painting issues. Low-level ghost painting involved family helping with minor tasks, less important work like coloring, whereas high-level ghost painting might only have the master's signature on the whole piece. Um, for instance, late Qing painter Ren Yi heavily used ghost painting. He was famed for his fresh, fluid Ganbi bird and flower paintings, hugely popular in the art market. But with orders flooding in like snow, Renyi had to paint dozens or even scores of works daily. Facing such a heavy load and family pressure, in his later years, Renyi grew depressed, turned to opium, and had his daughter Ren Shao ghost paint for him, with each piece only getting his signature. But honestly, ghost painting wasn't seen as a big deal back then. On one hand, painters controlled it fully. On the other, most buyers knew this unspoken rule, and the painter always did part of the work. However, forgeries made by unrelated outsiders using the painter's name were a whole different story. Regarding fake paintings, painters at the time generally had three attitudes. Let's start with the first one, being utterly annoyed. In the early Yuan dynasty, painter Qian Swan once inscribed on a work complaining about increasing forgeries of his art. He vowed to develop a new style under fresh aliases to distinguish from fakes. Meanwhile, Min painter Shen Zhou, founder of the Wu school, priced works highly, making him a favorite target for forgers. His friend Zhu Zhishan, one of Ming's four great talents we all know, once joked, "Shenzhou paints in the morning, by noon, fakes are copied." Within 10 days, the whole city swarmed with those counterfeits. Though hyperbolic, this reveals how advanced forgery networks were. Famous painters encountering their own fakes during lifetime was utterly common. Coincidentally, Shenzhou and his student Wen Zhengming typify the second attitude, indifference toward fakes. This next story perfectly illustrates it. Wen Zhengming had a student, Zhu Long, who assisted him, even ghost painted sometimes. But he also exploited this access to forge Wen's paintings for sale. Wen knew yet ignored it. Once, a collector sent a servant with gifts to zoos for a fake, but the confused servant went to Wen's home. Wen smiled, accepted the gifts, and told the servant, "I'll paint one for him. It'll be a real Wen Zhengming, but tell your master to pretend it's a fake Zhu Lang." Other painters shrewdly exploited fakes to boost fame. Take Wanli-era superstar Don Qichang. He clearly split works into two types: masterpieces for friends, respected figures, demanding full effort and uniqueness. The other being low-effort assembly line pieces for ordinary buyers. Though paid, Dong openly scorned these less knowledgeable fans, never caring if they got fakes nor warning collectors spotting counterfeits. To him, fakes spreading under his name amplified his reputation. And since he mass-produced mediocre works anyway, he didn't mind forgery's quality either. In his own words, he even self-deprecated that his recent paintings were inferior and could be seen as fakes. As orders piled up, overwhelmed yet wanting to earn money, Dong Kuchang hired two ghost painters while he only signed the works. These cases help us grasp what it means to call a painting 80% real or 50% real in Chinese art. In that era, the authenticity of art wasn't a black and white issue. Buyers were well aware of the unspoken rules about ghost painting and forgeries, not strongly opposing them and even appearing quite satisfied. However, if buyers had specific demands, they might request the painter to create it themselves without outsourcing. Given this buyer tolerance, James Cahill concluded in his book that by the Ming-Qing transition, many no longer cared about artistic value, but only if the painting bore the artist's personal mark. So, why did the criteria for evaluating paintings shift from artistic value to authenticity? Cahill believed we must understand this from a macro view of Chinese paintings' evolution. Chinese art history fostered an environment that revered amateur painters and despised professionals. This amateur means painters only painted in their spare time. Their main identity was as scholars or scholar officials focused on learning. For example, Shen Zhou and Wen Zhengming, we mentioned, were adept at writing and poetry, while Dong Qichang thrived in officialdom, rising to Minister of Rights in Manjing, equivalent to a first-rank official. For these literati painters, calligraphy and painting were pure hobbies, not for wealth, serving to cultivate themselves while expressing emotions. Thus, in public eyes, paintings made purely from interest embodied literati knowledge and character, seen as far more elegant than those by painters selling art for a living. Professionals sank to the bottom of the social ladder, deemed vulgar. So, how exactly did this reverence for amateurs and disdain for professionals form? The author James Cahill believed this was actually the outcome of centuries-long elitism in Chinese art history. Before the Song Dynasty, Chinese painter status was on par with craftsmen. By the mid-Song Dynasty, painting gradually became a refined art equal to poetry, music, and calligraphy. So literati began painting in spare time to enhance their cultivation. To stand out from professional painters, these literati created a new style, what we call literati painting. They were also passionate about writing, painting, theories, gradually gaining authority to judge what made art valuable and elegant. Take Dong Qichang, who we mentioned isn't bothered by fakes. He was a famous art historian. His painting theories shaped late Ming and early Qing art circles, and he famously judged authenticity before paintings with absolute certainty, as if art had zero value beyond being real or fake. Meanwhile, Confucianism rose in status during Min-Qing times, turning scholar officials into societal idols. So gradually, the public formed this stereotype: cultured people with high social standing, not just artistic skill, but also noble character, untouched by fame or profit. making them role models for all painters. In this environment, two peculiar trends emerged in Ming-Qing painting. First, painting evaluation criteria did a complete 180. Before the Song Dynasty, people focused more on a painting's subject and brush techniques. But by Ming-Qing times, with this cultish worship of literati painters, standards boiled down to fame and whether the style fit refined literati taste, whether the work was genuine, these external factors. Second, when a painter gained fame, even if he lived off selling art, he'd be recast as a detached amateur, a scholarly gentleman. This image makeover sometimes came from admiration, but often just to hike the painting's market value. Through James Cahill's research, we see most literati painters weren't detached at all. Very few could afford amateur ideals without income worries. Crushed by daily survival pressures, they couldn't live the transcendent, fame-shunning lives shown in their art. They relied on selling paintings, ghost painting, even forgery. So Cahill argues, without piercing this literati myth and understanding painters' real lives, discussing ancient art is like treating history as fairy tales, which is why this book exists. While restoring the real life of artists, James Cahill also aimed to shatter the century-old stereotypes and blind worship of literati painters. All right, that wraps up our interpretation of the painter's life. Keynotes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.